So hello everybody, welcome to the third video of the cardiovascular system physiology, and over here we'll be discussing about blood pressure and its regulation. So this is the normal tracing of a pressure versus time curve. The curve has a maxima which is termed as the systolic blood pressure. It has a minima which is known as the diastolic blood pressure, and it also has this notch over here which is known as the insusura. And from the point of rise of this curve to the notch, this is the phase where active ventricular ejection is taking place. The gap between the SBP and DBP is actually something known as the pulse pressure, and there is this line which denotes a term which is the mean arterial pressure. So first let's get familiar with these terms. You already know what are the respective positions on this pressure versus time curve. Now let's get familiar with them. Systolic blood pressure, like I said, is the maxima, is the maximum pressure generated, and it actually indicates the left ventricular performance. The diastolic blood pressure is a measure of the peripheral vascular resistance. So if somebody says your blood pressure is 120 by 80, 120 is your systolic blood pressure and 80 is your diastolic blood pressure. Now, what about PP or pulse pressure? PP, like I said, is the difference between your systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure, and it actually is a very good indicator of your stroke volume and is inversely proportional to arterial compliance. So in aged people where there is stiffening of the arteries, the arterial compliance will be markedly reduced and the pulse pressure will be very high. And now let's move on to the concept of mean arterial pressure. Now mean arterial pressure is very simple to understand. It's your definition, you get it from its name, from the name itself. That is, it's the mean of the pressures observed in the arterial system. And so if we want to mathematically calculate it, is actually the product of cardiac output and systemic vascular resistance plus central venous pressure. Now central venous pressure is the pressure which is found in the vena cava close to their opening in the right atrium, and typically they range from 0 to 4 millimeters of mercury. And so while calculating mean arterial pressure, this portion is ignored, and so mean arterial pressure is approximated as the product of cardiac output and systemic vascular resistance. And like you know, cardiac output is the product of stroke volume and heart rate, and so from there this formula comes. Now there is one more formula to calculate mean arterial pressure, and that is systolic blood pressure plus twice of diastolic blood pressure divided by 3. Now can you tell me why is that we are taking twice of the diastolic blood pressure? This is because the heart spends twice as much time in diastole than in systole. You know that the cardiac cycle is typically 0.8 seconds long, where 0.3 seconds are systole and 0.5 seconds are diastole. And so if we play with mathematics a bit, you know that systolic blood pressure can be written as pulse pressure plus diastolic blood pressure. And so from that we get this formula, that is mean arterial pressure is 1/3 of pulse pressure plus diastolic pressure. Okay. Now there is one important concept which I want all of you to know before we progress any further, and that is the concept of a Windkessel vessel. Now, so, what is meant by a Windkessel vessel? Windkessel in English typically refers to a air chamber, okay. But in cardiology, it refers to large arteries like the aorta, or suppose the carotids, the femoral arteries, and they refer to Windkessel vessels because of their elastic nature. Now, I want all of you to imagine a scenario where all of these arteries were not elastic. So, what happens? During systole, when the heart pumps out blood, blood will be traveling through these arteries. It will go down, but the moment the heart progresses to diastole, since there is no active push coming from the heart, the blood flow in these arteries would stop. And so it would mean that blood would flow through our body only only during systole, and during diastole all our peripheral organs would suffer from hypoxia. To prevent this, we have the concept, rather, the arteries are Windkessel in nature. What happens is that when during systole, when the heart actively pumps blood into the aorta or the carotids or in the femoral arteries, their walls become stretched, and during diastole, there will be active recoil or elastic recoil of the walls of these arteries, and this will further push blood through in a forward direction and ensure blood flow during diastole as well. So I hope you all understood the concept behind a Windkessel vessel. And over here, let's come to this part. Now, there are various branches of the arterial system. I hope you know that from the artery they will branch from the aorta they will branch the arteries. From the arteries there will be the arterioles. From the arterioles there will be the capillaries. From the capillaries the venules, the veins, and finally the vena cava. Now the pressure, the blood pressure is not uniform throughout all these vessels, and the max decrease of blood pressure is seen in the region of the arterioles, and that is why the arterioles are known as resistance vessels. However, there is one more terminology which you should remember, that is the veins and the vena cava. They are known as capacitance vessels because they can hold a large amount of blood inside them. They can dilate to a large degree and they can hold a large amount of blood in them. So arterioles are known as resistance vessels, and vena cava and the veins are known as capacitance vessels. And one final concept which you should remember is that from the aorta will give rise to the arteries will branch out into arterioles, and from the arterioles there is one entity which is very less discussed in cardiology, and that is meta-arterioles. Now, what are meta-arterioles? Meta-arterioles are essentially arterioles with a very less diameter, and also they have an incomplete muscular coat or an interrupted muscular coat, and they are also called precapillary sphincters. They essentially regulate the blood flow from the arterioles to the capillaries. Okay, and as you all know, from the arterioles blood will pass through to the venules via the capillaries. And now there is also a bypass system which you should be aware of, which bypasses the capillary bed. That is, blood from the arterioles will directly drain into the venules, and this bypass system is called a shunt vessel. Okay, so I hope all of you were able to understand this slide. It's a very important concept building slide as we progress further with this module. Now, when we talk about blood pressure regulation, there are two things to be kept in mind. Now, that is, blood pressure regulation can be both short term and long term. Short term blood pressure regulation is achieved via the baroreceptors, the chemoreceptors, the atrial and pulmonary artery reflexes, the CNS ischemic response, and there is also an entity known as the Cushing's reflex. And long-term regulation of blood pressure is primarily achieved via the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone axis. Now, these atrial and pulmonary artery reflexes are very minor reflexes. That is, in response to stretching of the atria or the pulmonary arteries, there will be some signals which will be sent to the vasomotor center, and they will respond accordingly to maintain the blood pressure. Now, as you can understand, when there is high blood pressure, these receptors in the atria and pulmonary arteries will be stretched to a greater degree, and hence the vasomotor center will send the signal to lower the blood pressure, and that is to lower the sympathetic outflow. And there is one more entity which I will be discussing, and that is a variation of blood pressure with respiration. Now these two things, that is the variation with blood pressure and renal regulation of blood pressure, I'll take both of them in a separate video, because they are in themselves a very large topics, and so I'll be discussing them separately. Before we jump into the regulation of blood pressure, we should learn about the vasomotor center that is so frequently referred to in literature. So these are the peripheral receptors of blood pressure. That is I'll be taking the example of the baroreceptor. Okay. Now the baroreceptor sends signals to the nucleus of the tractus solitarius. From the nucleus of the tractus solitarius arises glutaminergic neurons, which supplies a portion of the medulla which is known as CVLM. CVLM is caudal ventrolateral medulla. From the CVLM arises GABAergic neurons, which supplies the RVLM. RVLM is known as the rostral ventrolateral medulla. From the rostral ventrolateral medulla arises again glutaminergic neurons, which supplies portions of the spinal cord, which is referred to as the intermediolateral cell column. It's essentially the intermediolateral cell column of the thoracolumbar region, and this an outflow or an efferent from the intermediolateral cell column will stimulate the preganglionic sympathetic neurons. Now the preganglionic sympathetic neurons will release will release norepinephrine, which will stimulate the heart. It will also stimulate the adrenal medulla to release further catecholamines, and it will also be responsible for the vasoconstriction of the arterioles and the venules. And this connection from the intermediolateral cell column to the preganglionic sympathetic neuron is a cholinergic connection. Okay. Now, from this, I want you to remember one more fact, is that the arterioles and the venules, they don't have any cholinergic supply. All they have is this catecholaminergic supply. And why is this essential? We'll be discussing in the next slide. So, please remember this pathway, that there is an afferent from the baroreceptors which connects to the nucleus of the tractus solitarius, an efferent from the nucleus tractus solitarius, which are glutaminergic neurons, will act on the CVLM. The CVLM gives out GABAergic efferents, which are supplying the RVLM, and the RVLM are giving out glutaminergic efferents, which are supplying the IML. and the IML, that is intermediate lateral cell column, is giving out cholinergic efferents which are supplying the preganglionic sympathetic neuron, and the preganglionic sympathetic neuron will release postganglionic postganglionic neurons, which will be releasing norepinephrine in the heart, in the region of the arterioles and venues, and will also be stimulating the adrenal medulla. Okay, so now we'll come to the topic of baroreceptors. Baroreceptors are essentially stretch receptors, and there are two groups of baroreceptors. The first group is the aortic arch baroreceptors. They are present in the wall of the arch of the aorta, and their afferent supply is known as the aortic depressor nerve, which is a branch of the 10th cranial nerve. The second group of baroreceptors are found in the carotid sinus. That is a dilatation just at the bifurcation of the common carotid artery, and its afferent is the carotid sinus nerve, which is a branch of the 9th cranial nerve, that is the glossopharyngeal nerve. So what essentially happens? What is the role of the vasomotor center, and how do the baroreceptors essentially control the blood pressure? So suppose somebody's blood pressure is falling. Now this will stimulate the baroreceptors because they were being stretched to a certain degree when the patient or the person had a normal blood pressure, and subsequently when his or her blood pressure fell, the stretching decreased, and so the afferent signals which were going from the baroreceptors to the nucleus of the tractus solitarius via the 9th or the 10th cranial nerve will decrease. Now, the nucleus of the tractus solitarius was giving efferent glutaminergic supply to the caudal ventrolateral medulla. So, when the afferent signals to the nucleus of the tractus solitarius decreases, its efferent glutaminergic outflow will also decrease. So, the CVLM will be less stimulated, and hence the CVLM's GABAergic efferent supply to the RVLM will also decrease. Because of this, the RVLM is essentially inhibited by the CVLM due to GABAergic action will be disinhibited due to a decrease in GABA coming from the CVLM to the RVLM, and so the glutaminergic efferents from RVLM will start firing. These will stimulate the intermediate lateral cell column. The sympathetic outflow will increase, and there will be vasoconstriction, which will normalize the blood pressure. The sympathetic outflow will also stimulate the RAS axis, but that portion we'll be discussing in a separate video. So I hope you are getting this pathway. If you're not, please pause the video, go back and listen to it again. I'm sure you will get it. And similarly, when there is an increase in blood pressure, so the aortic arch and the carotid sinus baroreceptors will be stretched to a greater degree, and hence its afferent signals to the nucleus of the tractus solitarius will increase. The glutaminergic efferents from the nucleus of the tractus solitarius to the CVLM will also increase. The CVLM will start discharging GABA to the RVLM at a much higher rate. The RVLM will be inhibited. There will be decreased glutaminergic efferent supply to the IML. The sympathetic outflow will decrease, and finally blood pressure will occur, and the vasodilatation will occur, and the blood pressure will be normalized. So this is a very essential slide. It helps to build a lot of concepts. And one more thing we should remember, that this increased sympathetic outflow will also be responsible for increasing the heart rate. Okay, I'm just writing it over here. And this decreased sympathetic outflow will also be responsible for decreasing the heart rate. So not just on the blood pressure, it will have its effect on the heart rate as well. So Please remember this slide. It's a very important, and it's a very important concept building slide. And uh, if you are not understanding it, please pause the video, go back and listen to it again. Okay, since we are discussing about the regulation of blood pressure, we need to know for what range of pressure which regulatory mechanism is acting. I know we have only discussed the baroreceptors till now, but this portion is essential and you should know it before we delve into the chemoreceptors and the CNS ischemic response. So, when the blood pressure is essentially between 60 to 180, the baroreceptors will be active. In some books, it's even given 60 to 200, and in Ganong, if I remember correctly, the range is 50 to 150. So more or less, to be on the safe side, just say 60 to 180. Okay, and this portion is given in Ganong that the baroreceptor activity is maximal when the blood pressure is between 70 to 110. Okay. Now, what happens when the blood pressure falls below 60? This is when the chemoreceptor activity begins, and the chemoreceptor activity persists for blood pressures between the range of 40 to 60 millimeters of mercury. Beyond 40, chemoreceptor reflex will be blunted, and in this region, it's primarily the CNS ischemic response. Okay. Now, baroreceptors provide moment to moment correction of blood pressure. Okay, so it's not useful when we are discussing about the, or when we are considering long term regulation of blood pressure, but moment to moment correction of blood pressure is achieved via the baroreceptors. And one more thing you should remember with respect to baroreceptors is the concept of baroreceptor resetting. This phenomenon is seen in chronic hypertensive, and here the baroreceptors are reset to maintain an elevated rather than a normal blood pressure. That is, the blood pressure will the baroreceptors will interpret that the normal blood pressure of the person is 140 instead of 110. So it will always tend to correct the blood pressure towards 140. Okay, so this is a small graph where you can understand that a person who has a normal blood pressure and a person who is hypertensive, their correction, that their baroreceptor correcting, will differ greatly. This is plotted for percentage fall in blood pressure versus pressure in the carotid sinus. Okay, H signifies a hypertensive patient and N signifies a normotensive patient. Okay. One more concept which all of you should be familiar with when it comes to blood pressure is the concept of autoregulation. Now, it is well developed in kidneys and is also seen in the mesentery and the skeletal muscles and the brain, liver, myocardium. What happens is that for a certain pressure range, the blood flow through an organ remains relatively constant. For example, in the kidneys, for a pressure range of 60 to 180, the blood flow is more or less constant. There is a very slight increase as the blood pressure is increasing, but is technically very negligible. However, on either side of this range, there will be a marked fall or a marked increase in the blood flow. And there are two theories as to why this autoregulation occurs. One is known as the myogenic theory. This is due to the intrinsic contractile response of the vascular smooth muscle, and it's based on Laplace's law, that is P is proportional to T by R. Okay, and there is one more theory, that is the metabolic theory, that is the intrinsic activity of the vascular smooth muscles generates some certain metabolites. Now, what happens is that these metabolites are essentially vasodilatory in action. So when there is increased blood flow, these metabolites are washed away fast, and hence due to the absence of these vasodilatory metabolites, the arteries will constrict and the blood flow will be restored or normalized. When there is a decrease in blood flow, there is stasis, and these vasodilatory metabolites will start accumulating, and this will cause vasodilatation to restore the blood flow. I hope you are clear with this concept. Now let's come to the chemoreceptors finally. So the chemoreceptors are of two types. There's the peripheral chemoreceptors, and then there is the central chemoreceptors as well. The peripheral chemoreceptors are further of two groups. One is the aortic bodies, and this is the carotid bodies. The aortic bodies are found in the aortic arch, and the carotid bodies are situated one behind each bifurcation of the common carotids. Again, the aortic arch's afferent supply is via the 10th cranial nerve, and the carotid body's afferent supply is via the 9th cranial nerve. So this is the ultrastructure of a chemoreceptor. These red zones are your blood sinuses, and these blue zones are something known as the type 1 glomus cells. And there is this afferent supply and sympathetic efferent axons. The sympathetic efferent axons are essentially preganglionic, and these will be responsible for increasing a gain of carbon dioxide. Now, why is this supply essential? We'll deal with it in the respiratory physiology portion. For the time being, just remember the ultrastructure of these chemoreceptors. However, the most important cell over here are these type 1 glomus cells. Now, these type 1 glomus cells have two essential channels. One is this oxygen gated potassium channel, and the other is this L-type calcium channel. And of course, their afferent supply goes directly to the respiratory control center in the medulla. Now, what happens when the partial pressure of oxygen is high in the arteries or in the blood? The potassium channel is open because it's oxygen dependent, and the calcium channel is closed, and the glomus cell is quiescent. However, when the PO2 falls, the potassium channels close, the cell membrane depolarizes, the L-type calcium channels open, and these afferent nerves start sending stimuli to the respiratory control center. So I discussed that the decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood will be stimulating the peripheral chemoreceptors. In practicality, there are two more stimuli, that is an increase in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the arterial blood and an increase in pH as well. Both of these will stimulate the peripheral chemoreceptors. There will be increase in vagal discharge, which will send signals to the medulla, and also in response to the chemoreceptor signals there will be hyperapnea, there's an increased respiratory rate, and also the adrenal medulla will be stimulated to release norepinephrine. These two actions will increase the heart rate and the cardiac output. Once again, I would like to stress on the fact that the chemoreceptor reflex is more important when it comes to the respiratory physiology. Okay, the baroreceptor reflex is the most essential portion of the cardiovascular system BP regulation. This chemoreceptor reflex will kick in on a very later stage when the blood pressure has drastically fallen to below 60 or 50 millimeters of mercury. Now, here comes the central chemoreceptor reflex. What happens is that When there is hypoxia and hypercarbia, there is an increase in carbon dioxide content of blood, the RVLM chemoreceptors, that is, these chemoreceptors are found in the region of the rostroventrolateral medulla, will be stimulated. Consequently, the RVLM will start to discharge. They will send its an efferent glutaminergic supply to the IML, and the sympathetic outflow will increase, and this will increase the blood pressure. However, one thing needs to be kept in mind, that this increased blood pressure beyond a limit will stimulate the arterial baroreceptors, and hence there will be reflex bradycardia. This central chemoreceptor reflex is in essence the CNS ischemic response mentioned in Guyton, and this is a last ditch effort of the CNS to control a miserably falling blood pressure. Okay, and sometimes the blood pressure may increase to a level like 250 to 300 millimeters of mercury because of this central chemoreceptor reflex. One more thing I would like to mention over here is the Cushing's reflex. So what happens is that when there is increased intracranial pressure, commonly seen in road traffic accidents and where there is head trauma, this increased intracranial pressure will cause hypoxia and hypercarbia in the region of the rostroventrolateral medulla, and this entire sequence of events will occur. That is, there will be increased blood pressure, there will be reflex bradycardia, and there will also be irregular breathing. This is known as the Cushing's reflex or the Cushing's triad, and I know rather this question was asked to me during the gold medal exams, so this is a very high yield topic. All of you should be familiar with it. Now, one thing you should be kept in mind, that an increase in intracranial pressure will not indefinitely increase the blood pressure. There is a limit. So for some time there will be a linear increase in blood pressure with increase in intracranial pressure, but finally after reaching that limit, blood pressure will not increase much with respect to an increase in intracranial pressure. So over here I need to discuss two more concepts. These are primarily more important when it comes to respiratory physiology. However, we should discuss this over here itself. What the thing is, the response of the central chemoreceptors to an increase in partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So this partial pressure of increased PaCO2 will directly stimulate the RVLM to cause vasoconstriction and increase blood pressure. However, peripherally, an increased carbon dioxide concentration in blood will cause direct vasodilatation. So in essence, these two effects will cancel each other out. And when there is further and further increase in carbon dioxide concentration, this RVLM will be stimulated to a much greater degree than the peripheral vasodilatory stimulation, and so the blood pressure will start to rise very, very slowly when the carbon dioxide content is very high. Okay. And one more thing I need to discuss over here is in the region of the central chemoreceptors. This is how it looks. This is the blood-brain barrier. Now, bicarbonate ion cannot penetrate the blood-brain barrier. H plus ions also cannot penetrate the blood-brain barrier. Only carbon dioxide can penetrate the blood-brain barrier. It comes into the extracellular fluid, and from the extracellular fluid it goes into the intracellular fluid. The intracellular fluid, it undergoes bicarbonate formation, and due to action of carbonic anhydrase enzyme, this formation of bicarbonate ion and H plus ion. This H plus ion will go into the ECF, and this is sensed by the central chemoreceptors, which lie in close proximity to the ventral and dorsal group of respiratory group of neurons, and this is why an increase in concentration of carbon dioxide will cause stimulation of the RVLM and also will cause an increase in respiratory rate. So over here I try to discuss a lot of concepts. Again, if you have not understood any portion, feel free to reach out to me. Also, you can pause the video, go back and again listen to it. I'm sure you will soon be able to grasp this topic. And in the next video I'll be discussing about renal handling um, of blood pressure. Oh, and one thing I forgot to discuss, actually this is a small homework for you, is the relationship of heart rate and respiratory rate. Okay, so I'll give you two clues. One is that the inspiratory center rise in close proximity to the RBLM. So when the inspiratory center is stimulated due to central irradiation, the RBLM will be stimulated. Also, when we inspire, there is a negative intrathoracic pressure which is generated. Now this negative intrathoracic pressure will cause an increase in right atrial return, but due to damming of blood in the pulmonary vasculature, the left atrial return will decrease. So now I hope you all will be getting what is happening when, rather what is the relationship between heart rate and respiratory rate. Uh, Mention it in the comment section below. Let's see how many of you get it right. Okay, so in the next video I'll be discussing the relationship of um, heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, these three functions, and I will also be taking up the vast topic, that is the renal regulation of blood pressure. Okay, I hope you all like the video. Please like, share and subscribe, and take care. Thank you.